I've seen a lot in my years working emergency medicine. Gunshot wounds, cardiac arrests, families screaming in the waiting room. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that Christmas. December 25th. Snow was falling, hard outside the hospital windows. I was on a 24-hour shift, not because I had to be, but because someone needed to be. That's what you do when you're the senior attending and a single parent. You pick up the weight when others can't, or won't. My daughter, Emily, had made plans to spend Christmas dinner with my parents. She was 16, responsible, kind, the kind of girl who offers to help neighbors shovel snow without being asked. My parents had always kept her at arm's length, especially after my wife died. They said they didn't know how to connect with teenagers these days, but I always suspected it went deeper than that. I had just stepped out of trauma bay 2 when I saw a text on my phone. "Dad, I'm coming home. They said there's no room for me at the table. Grandma said the table was already full and they didn't expect me. Aunt Rachel told me to just head back. I'm sorry." At first I thought I'd misread it. No room? What were they talking about? I called her. She didn't answer. She was probably driving. I stood there in the corridor, gloves still on, the beeping of monitors around me. A nurse asked me if I was okay. I nodded. But I wasn't. Something sharp and invisible pressed into my chest. I finished my shift. 12 more hours. Stabilized a stabbing victim. Held the hand of a mother who just lost her son in a car wreck. Smiled for the families who were lucky enough to leave with their loved ones. I did my job, because that's what doctors do. But, inside, I was playing that message over and over in my mind. My daughter, 16, dressed up for Christmas, brought a pie she baked herself, knocked on the door expecting warmth, and was told to go home. Alone. In the snow. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't storm out of the hospital or call anyone to scream. That's never been my way. I'm a man who listens, who waits, who acts when it matters. When my shift ended, the parking lot was buried in snow. I got in my truck, turned the heat on full blast, and drove home in silence. Emily was asleep on the couch when I arrived. She'd left the lights on and a plate of cookies on the counter. One was half-eaten. I kissed her forehead and covered her with the blanket she'd kicked off in her sleep. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, still wearing my scrubs. I didn't touch the cookies. I just stared at the silent Christmas tree in the corner. And that's when I knew. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to plead with them to treat her better. I was going to write, not just a letter, but the kind of message that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Because they didn't just turn their backs on my daughter. They told her, without using those exact words, that she didn't belong. And I was about to show them with absolute clarity what it feels like to be excluded. They always called her the girl. Not Emily, not your daughter, just the girl. It started subtly after my wife Hannah passed away. A drunk driver took her on a rainy afternoon 6 years ago. Emily was 10. I was 38. And my world collapsed. I stepped away from private practice, moved to shift work in the ER to stay close to home. It wasn't the glamorous track my father had imagined when I graduated med school. He used to introduce me as the next Dr. Wallace to run a department. After I buried Hannah, he stopped calling me that. My mother suggested I let them take care of Emily for a while, saying, "You're grieving, and she needs structure." But I couldn't hand her off like luggage. She needed me, and I needed her. So I did what any decent man would do. I learned to braid hair, I packed school lunches. I showed up to every parent-teacher meeting with my scrubs under a coat, coffee in one hand, hope in the other. And yet year after year, visit after visit, my family acted like she was a guest in her own bloodline. I'll never forget Emily's 11th birthday. I brought her to my parents' house with a cake and balloons. When we walked in, my mother said, "Oh, you brought her?" And my sister Rachel whispered, "You could have warned us. We weren't exactly prepared." Prepared? I let it go, told Emily they were just tired. That adults sometimes say silly things, but I remembered. I always remembered. And then there was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. My father carved the turkey, looked across the table, and asked Rachel's stepson if he'd considered applying to Duke. Right in front of Emily. My daughter had just gotten accepted into a STEM magnet school. No one asked her a single thing that day. She stayed quiet, ate little, washed dishes afterward like a guest trying not to overstay her welcome. Still, I let it go. I didn't want to pick fights over every slight. I thought maybe, with time, they'd come around. That they'd see her the way I did. Strong, curious, full of heart. But I was wrong. The night after Christmas, I pulled out a box I'd been quietly adding to over the years. A journal, photos, snippets of things said or left unsaid. Kept them not because I was planning revenge, but because I couldn't afford to forget. People like my parents, they're masters of rewriting history, of pretending it wasn't that bad, that you're being too sensitive, but I knew what they'd done. And more importantly, I knew what they refused to do, love her, truly love her. I looked through the journal that night, flipped to a page from 4 years ago. Rachel told Emily that Mom and Dad just don't do kids, but I remember how they were with my nephews. Sleepovers, gifts, trips to Disney. This isn't about kids. This is about her. That sentence, it with me. I stared at it for a long time. Emily wasn't rejected because she was inconvenient. She was rejected because she reminded them of the life I chose, a life they never approved of. A single father who didn't remarry, who didn't follow their path, who dared to make his daughter the center of his world. They couldn't erase me, so they tried to erase her. And now, after what they did this Christmas, I finally understood. Some stories are too dangerous to let others write. It was time for me to take the pen. Emily didn't cry when she got home. Not that I saw, anyway. She was always strong like her mother, quiet, steady. But I could tell something had cracked that night. I got home just after midnight. The snow was still falling, soft and silent. Our porch light was on, casting a glow over the front steps. I remember seeing her boots by the door, wet, half-melted snow beneath them. She'd come home early, hours earlier than planned. When I walked in, the house was dark, except for the lights on the tree. She'd left it on, maybe hoping it would feel more like Christmas if she did. On the kitchen counter sat a plate with one cookie missing and a glass of milk only half full. Then I saw her, curled up on the couch in a hoodie, legs pulled in tight, fast asleep. Her phone rested on her chest, and next to her on the floor was a small gift bag, one she'd probably brought for my mother. Still sealed, still full. I didn't wake her. I just stood there for a moment watching. My daughter, 16, treated like an afterthought by people who shared her blood. I could only imagine how that moment had gone, what it felt like to walk up to that house, a house she visited every holiday since she was a child, and be told she wasn't expected, that there wasn't enough room, that she should just head back. She must have stood on that porch in the cold, holding that little bag, looking through the window at a room full of warmth and food and laughter, and realizing she wasn't part of it. She never said exactly how it happened. Emily's never been one to dramatize things. But when I asked her gently the next morning, she just shrugged and said, "Grandma said they didn't know I was coming. Aunt Rachel said they only set the table for 6. Grandpa didn't say anything, he just kept watching TV. I nodded. Then I asked, "And what did you say?" She hesitated. Then, nothing. I just said okay and left. That word, okay, broke me more than any tear would have. Because I know what okay really means when someone says it like that. It means, I'm used to this. It means, I didn't expect better. It means, I won't give you the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. I didn't try to cheer her up that morning. I didn't offer some hollow promise like, they didn't mean it. I just made us breakfast, sat beside her at the table, and listened as she talked about her chemistry project and how she might join the robotics club next semester. We didn't mention Christmas, but something had changed. She didn't ask about seeing them again, and I didn't push her to, because I finally understood this wasn't a one-time thing. It was the final proof of a pattern I'd been too patient with, too forgiving. That night, after she went to bed, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank document. The blinking cursor waited like a held breath. I wasn't writing to punish them, wasn't writing for revenge. I was writing because I needed them to see what they did. Not just that night, but for years. The cracks they ignored, the child they dismissed, and most of all, I needed to write it in a way they couldn't argue with, because silence can be mistaken for weakness. But the truth, once written, is undeniable. I didn't write it in anger. That would have been too easy. Anger fades and people dismiss it. He was just upset. He overreacted. I didn't want them to have that excuse. I wanted them to sit with it, to read every word and see themselves clearly, maybe for the first time. So I took my time. I started with a simple sentence. This is not a letter asking for an apology, and it wasn't. I didn't want one. Apologies from people like them come wrapped in denial. We didn't mean it like that. You misunderstood. They don't say sorry to heal. They say it to move on faster than they should. So I wrote differently, carefully, precisely. Each paragraph was surgical, just like how I approach a patient in trauma. No wasted movement, no emotional bleeding. Just the truth, exposed and undeniable. I detailed moments over the years they thought I'd forgotten. Not in an accusatory tone, just facts. Like how, when Emily was 12, she sat alone in their living room while Rachel's kids opened gifts. They'd accidentally forgotten to bring one for her. My mother said, "Oh, I thought you were bringing hers." Or the time Emily baked a pie for Thanksgiving and overheard my father say, "We should probably just throw this one out. Too risky with kids baking unsupervised." I wrote about the birthdays they skipped, the school, events they ignored, the way they never once invited her over on her own, even though they hosted Rachel's boys almost every weekend. And then I wrote about Christmas. I wrote about how she spent the night in silence, curled up in a hoodie on a couch that should have been empty, because she should have been with family. I wrote about the gift she brought still unopened, the plate of cookies she set out for me, pretending everything was fine. I described her face when she said, "It's okay." And I let that line sit on its own, because some truths don't need commentary. They just need space to breathe. At the end of the letter, I added this: "You didn't forget her. You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision. And now so have." That was it. No threats, no ultimatums, just a statement. One they couldn't spin, one they couldn't unhear. I printed it, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote one word on the front in my father's handwriting. Read. Not from Adam. Not "please read this." Just read. Because that's all I needed them to do, and when they did, when their eyes passed over every word, I wanted them to feel what Emily felt for years. Not rage, not betrayal. Just invisibility. I didn't know when I'd give it to them. Not yet. I wasn't going to mail it. That felt too impersonal. Too distant. No. This letter needed to arrive like the truth always does. Unexpected, undeniable, and absolutely on time. So, I folded it once, placed it in my drawer, and waited. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to shout back. It's to be so clear that they can't pretend they didn't hear you. 1 year later, the snow fell just the same. The house looked familiar. The same wreath on the door, the same quiet street, the same tree blinking softly in the corner of our living room. But inside, everything was different. Emily was in the kitchen, laughing with Dr. Hassan's daughter while they decorated gingerbread cookies. On the couch, a young couple I'd met during a long shift sat holding hands, their baby asleep on Rachel's old quilt, the only thing from my childhood, home I ever kept. The house was full, and for once none of them shared my last name, and I liked it that way. It had started small. A few months after Christmas, I began inviting people over for dinners. Nurses, residents, paramedics, patients I'd crossed paths with on their worst days, people who knew the value of kindness, people who showed up for others not out of duty, but because it's who they were. Over time, we became something, not a replacement for blood, and something better, a chosen family. Emily was the heart of it. She had blossomed in that year. More confident, more open. I'd catch her smiling more, laughing louder, standing straighter. She had stopped asking about her grandparents, and I had stopped hoping they'd change. This Christmas, we cooked together. Set the table for 12. No crystal, no fine china. Just mismatched plates, paper crowns, and a whole lot of warmth. And while the ham was in the oven, I stepped out for a drive. I didn't say where I was going. Emily just looked up and nodded, like she already knew. I took the long route. Past the old neighborhood. Parked 3 houses down from the place I used to call home. It looked the same. Perfectly trimmed hedges, glowing windows, silence too thick to feel real. I got out, walked up the front steps, and slid the envelope into the mail slot. No note. No knock. Just the letter. Quiet, sharp, and final. As I walked away, I felt something strange. Not victory, not revenge, relief. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to make them understand. I was just letting go. They'd had every chance to choose her, to show up, to step up, to care, and they didn't. So now they could sit with that choice, alone, just like they made her feel last year. When I got back home, Emily had already set the table. There were candles, music, laughter drifting in from the kitchen. She looked up and asked, "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Perfect." Later that night, she stood up with a glass of sparkling cider and said, "I used to think family was something you're born into. But I've learned that real family shows up. They open the door when it's cold outside. They save you a seat even if the table's full. Thank you for being that for me." I didn't say anything. I just raised my glass. And in that moment, I knew I had nothing left to say to the people who once sat at my old table, because now I had a better one. It was the morning after Christmas when they found it. My mother probably picked it up first. She checks the mail early, always has. Even when there's nothing to expect, she waits for something. A card, a catalog, some proof the world still remembers them. She must have seen the envelope. No return address. Just one word written on the front in block letters. Reed, knowing her, she brought it in with a suspicious squint, turned it over twice and set it on the kitchen counter like it might be dangerous, and it was. She wouldn't open it until after breakfast. My father would be sitting at the table in his usual chair, reading the paper, half listening. Rachel would have been there too. She always stayed over during the holidays, even though she has her own home. It's easier that way. No one questions the arrangement. They just play pretend. That's what they do best. I can picture the moment she opened it, how the paper unfolded. The first few lines drawing polite confusion, then clarity, then discomfort. There were no insults, no yelling. Just the kind of words that make it impossible to look away from yourself. As the paragraphs moved on, they must have realized what it was. Not an outburst, not a plea, a record, a mirror held steady, refusing to blink. Every story I wrote in that letter was true, no exaggeration, no embellishment. Dates, words, events, each one like a scalpel, exposing exactly who they'd been and how they'd made Emily feel. There's no defense against a truth you lived out loud in front of witnesses. Imagine Rachel tried to laugh it off at first. He's being dramatic. Until she reached the part about Thanksgiving, then about Emily's 12th birthday, then the quote, word for word, that she herself had said in the hallway about not having to include her in everything. And then came the ending. Tratto. Lines. I rewrote them 7 times before they felt right. You didn't forget her, you didn't overlook her. You decided she didn't belong. And now, she doesn't. Just not in the way you intended. I didn't need to say more. I didn't tell them I'd moved on. I showed them. Not through revenge, not through confrontation. Just by excluding them the way they'd excluded her, but with more grace than they ever offered. Later that day, I got the first call. My mother's number flashed on the screen. I didn't answer. 2 hours later, Rachel called. Then my father. Voicemail after voicemail, each one sounding more unsure than the last. I didn't listen to them. I just let the notifications pile up. Let the silence speak. Because some things don't need a conversation. They just need to be heard. And now, they had finally listened. The first message came that night, a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was tight, almost trembling. Not with sadness, but with disbelief. Adam, we read your letter. I didn't realize you felt that way. Maybe we made mistakes. Maybe you misunderstood some things, but can we talk? Please call me back. She didn't say Emily's name, not once. The second came from Rachel. Her voice was sharper, defensive in tone, like she needed to regain control. Look, I know you're upset, but airing this stuff out in a letter? That's not how family handles problems. We could have had a conversation. You didn't need to... I stopped listening, because yes, Rachel, this was how family handles problems. When they refuse to listen for years, sometimes the truth has to arrive without warning. No performance. No debate, just paper, ink, and clarity. The next day, a letter arrived at my door, not an email. A real letter, my father's handwriting. It was surprisingly short. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just said, "If you believe we've done harm, then maybe we have. I hope one day you'll let us explain. I don't know what else to say." That line stayed with me. Not because it was moving, but because it was empty. If you believe, as if it were just a feeling I had. A perception, not a documented reality. One they'd lived out again and again in front of a girl they never truly saw. I folded the letter and put it away in a drawer. Not out of bitterness, but because I'd already made peace with it. I wasn't seeking apologies. I wasn't craving closure. I had already found it. In the silence that followed Christmas. In the sound of laughter at my table. In Emily's eyes. When she spoke freely in a room full of people who cared. That night, she asked if I'd heard from them. I told her the truth. She hesitated. Then said, "Are you going to call them?" I looked at her and asked, "Do you want me to?" She shook her head without thinking. "No, I just wanted to know if you would." I nodded, and that was the end of it. No more questions. No long conversations. Just an understanding between us that the page had turned. They hadn't been pushed out of our lives. They'd walked themselves out. All I'd done was close the door they left open for too long. The next few days were quiet. No more calls, no more letters, just peace. And it was in that quiet that I realized something. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't making someone pay. It's making sure they understand what they lost, and knowing they'll never get it back. The snow melted late that year. By February, the front yard was still covered in patches of ice, but the days were stretching longer. The sun stayed just a little more each afternoon, like it had decided we'd been through enough darkness for one season. Life moved forward. Emily made the robotics team. She started driving herself to school, blasting old music she pretended not to like. She laughed louder, told more stories at dinner, and stopped checking her phone when the holidays approached. And me? I breathed easier. The house felt warmer. Not because of the heat, but because we weren't waiting anymore. For invitations. For approval, for affection that never came. We had stopped looking backward. One Saturday morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee as sunlight spilled across the counter. Emily came in wearing one of Hannah's old sweaters. She poured herself a glass of juice, sat down, and without looking up, said, "You did the right thing." I didn't need to ask what she meant. The letter, the silence, the decision to finally let go. I nodded. "I know." She looked out the window. "I think I needed to see it too, that it's okay to walk away when people show you who they are." I smiled. "It's not just okay, Em. Sometimes it's the only way forward." That spring, we hosted Easter dinner. The table was full again, nurses from the ER, my colleague Sam and his husband, a retired firefighter I'd once treated, and a single mom Emily met through volunteer work. Laughter filled the room like music, and no one asked who was related to whom. Because it didn't matter, we were a family, not by name but by presence. After dinner, as the dishes clattered in the kitchen and the scent of lemon pie filled the air, I sat on the back porch with a blanket over my knees and watched Emily help the younger kids look for Easter eggs in the yard. She looked so much like her mother in that moment, not in appearance, but in posture, calm, capable, full of light, and I thought about how close I came to teaching her the wrong lesson, to showing her that loyalty means enduring mistreatment, that love has to be earned, that family gets a free pass to hurt you as long as they share your blood. But I didn't. I showed her that boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They're acts of protection. That love doesn't hide behind tradition or expectations, and that sometimes the bravest thing a father can do is leave the door closed. I haven't heard from them since, and I don't expect to. But if they ever wonder where I went, why I stopped coming, stopped calling, all they have to do is remember that letter, the one I wrote when I finally understood. You don't have to burn bridges. Sometimes you just stop crossing them, and you start building something better, with the people who never made you beg for a seat at the table.